This lesson is on radical equations. Objective of this lesson to solve radical equations. Let's consider this example. Tonga Trench in the Pacific Ocean is a potential source for a tsunami. Tsunami is a large ocean wave generated by an undersea earthquake. The formula for a tsunami speed S in meters per second is S equals 3.1 radical D, where D is the depth of the ocean in meters. Equations like S equals 3.1 radical D that contains radicals with variables in the radicand are called radical equations. To solve these equations, the first step in solving radical equations is to first isolate the radical on one side of the equation. Then after that, the second step is to square each side of the equation to eliminate the radical. Okay, so these are the steps that we are going to use in solving radical equations. First step is to isolate the radical, and then the second step is square each side. So step 1, step 2. Okay, let's go back to our example and see how that works. Find the depth of the Tonga Trench if a tsunami speed is 322 meters per second. So we know that the speed right away is 322. That's a given. So we represent S equals 322, and that's where we are. S equals 3.1 radical D. Replace S with 322. We did that already. And we divide both sides by 3.1 to isolate 3.1. Okay. After dividing both sides by 3.1, we end up with 322 divided over 3.1. And finally, we square both sides to take away the radical sign. If you square both sides, you enter it in the calculator, and this is the value that you get. Okay. Now, what does this value represent? It represents 10,789 meters. The depth of the Tonga Trench is approximately 10,789 meters. Okay, let's move on, and let's consider these two examples. Solve for each equation. If we want to solve for each equation, and we are asked to find radical x plus 4 equals 7, this is how it is going to look like. Let me get this one. So if we have radical on the side right here, okay, and we have radical 4 or radical x plus 4 equals 7. To be able to solve this equation, again, first step is to isolate the radical. So we subtract 4 to both sides of our equation. Subtracting 4 to both sides will end up with radical x equals 3. And then the second step in solving radical equations is to square both sides. So we square both sides of our equation. And after squaring both sides of the equation, we end up with x equals 9. So the value of x is equal to 9. Okay? The next example is you have radical x plus 3 plus 5 equals 9. And be very careful not to put 5 under the radical sign or to put 3 outside the radical sign, because it's going to change the entire equation. So in this case, first step is to isolate the radical on one side of the equation. So we have radical x plus 3. Okay, we subtract 5 to both sides, end up with 4. And then the next step is to square both sides of the equation. So we square both sides, end up with x plus 3 equals 16. This is now a one-step equation. Subtract 3 to both sides, x equals 13. Okay, and that's how we solve for example number 1. Let's move on to example number 2. Example number 2 is simply saying, asking or warning you that when you square each side of an equation, it does not necessarily produce results that satisfy the original equation. Therefore, you must check all solutions when you solve radical equations. Okay, let's look at example number 2 and see how that works. Example number 2, let's put this on the side. We're asked to solve radical 3x minus 5 equals x minus 5. So the first step is to isolate the radical, and it's already been isolated. So we go to the second step, which is squaring both sides of the equation. When you square both sides of the equation, okay, now have radical 3x minus 5, and that has been squared, equals x minus 5 squared. Okay, this now ends up with 3x minus 5, and this is a perfect square trinomial, and the perfect square trinomial becomes x squared, okay, minus 10x plus 25. To be able to solve this type of an equation, remember that we need to equate the equation to 0, so we can use the zero product property. So what do? We add 5 to both sides and subtract 3x. We add 5 to both sides, subtract 3x. Okay, so with that, you end up with 0, equals x squared, minus 13x plus 30. And from what we learned, in order to solve this type of a problem, okay, we factor x squared minus 13x plus 30. And factoring x squared minus 13x plus 30, okay, we use the power of x. 30 is inside, 30 is on top, negative 13 is the bottom. What are the two factors of 30, which will give you a sum of negative 13? That would be negative 10 and negative 3. So if you factor this, this becomes 0 equals x minus 10 and x minus 3. Using the zero product property, this is 0 equals x minus 10 and 0 equals x minus 3. It gives you the value of x here, which is equal to 10. Value of x is equal to 3. Okay. The next thing you need to do is you need to check if 10 or 3 satisfies the equation. If I substitute 10 to my equation, okay, if I get 10 and I substitute 10, this now becomes, okay, this now becomes 3 times 10 minus 5 is it equal to 10 minus 5. Okay, so this is 30 minus 5, which is 25. Is it equal to 5? So we know for a fact that 5 will be equal to 5. So that checks out. 10 works. Okay, how about the last one? I now have radical 3 times 3 minus 5. Is it equal to 3 minus 5? Okay, if you notice, this is 4. Radical 4 is it equal to negative 2. So going back here, 2 is not equal to negative 2. So basically 3 is not a solution for this radical equation. Okay? So the only solution for this radical equation is 10. So that is example number 2. Let us look at example number 3. So looking at example number 3, okay, we have the geometric mean of A and B is x if A over x is equal to x over B. Find two numbers that have a geometric mean of 8, given that one number is 12 more than the other number. It's a word problem, and just like any word problem, by the way, geometric mean is uh, just another way of finding the average between two positive numbers. Okay, and you learn more about that when you get to high school. Right now, let's look at this word problem. And as such, as a word problem, when you look at a word problem, the first step is always a let statement. So the let statement is let n represent the lesser number, and let n plus 12 represent the greater number. Where did that come from? It came from these find two numbers that have a geometric mean of 8, given that one number is 12 more than the other number. That's where n plus 12 came from. Okay, from there we try to plan to solve our equation. We have a over x equals x over b. Replace each variable with appropriate value, and then we have now n over 8 equals 8 over n plus 12, because you have been given the geometric mean of 8. Okay, and then we simply solve, okay, for the equation. And solving for the equation, again, we use my trusted page here. You now have n plus 12, okay, n plus 12, or sorry, n plus 8, n over 8, equals 8 over n plus 12. Okay, cross products from what we learned in the past, this now becomes n times n plus 12 equals 64. Or this becomes n squared plus 12n using the distributive property equals 64. And to solve this type of an equation, okay, we need to equate it to 0, so we can use the zero product property. So we have n squared plus 12n minus 64 equals 0. Okay, again, factoring to be able to solve for the value of n, you end up with negative you want to find factors of negative 64, which will give you a sum of 12. And in this case, it's going to be 16 and negative 4. Sorry, it's positive 16 and negative 4. Okay, using those factors, we end up with, right here, n plus 16 n minus 4 equals 0. Using the zero product property, this becomes n plus 16 equals 0 and n minus 4 equals 0. End up with n equals negative 16, n equals positive 4. Okay, and if we check both of these values, okay, against our original equation, we find out that both of these values will work. Okay, so therefore, in this case, the numbers are negative 16 and negative 4, or 4 and 16 will be the geometric mean. Why? Because our let statement represents n as the lesser number, n plus 12 as a greater number, and if you use negative 16, okay, if you use negative 16, this will be negative 16 And negative 16 plus 12 is negative 4. And if we use the number 4, okay, it'll be 4 and 16. So those are the two possible values. Okay? And that's the end of it. So again, after this lesson, what you need to do is do this. We need to let me just get it. This one. There you go. Okay. What to do after listening to this lesson is you need to, in your notebook, in no more than a page, write or type a summary of what you've learned, responding to the objective of the lesson. Write a question you may want to ask in class about this lesson. Okay? That's it. Thank you.